Welcome to FemLead, the podcast on female leadership and role models. Prepare to feel inspired and better equipped to navigate your career path. I am Alexandra Chabotaru, your host, and together with my guests, we will tackle a new field of work in each episode. The aim of this podcast is to deep dive into career perspectives and strategies to navigate your desired path for success. Enjoy! Hello all, and welcome to a new episode of FemLead. It's great to tackle a new topic that I was personally not aware of before: authentic parenting. Today, we will talk about reclaiming the responsibility for ourselves and be conscious of how we raise children. My next guest is a certified conscious parenting coach, international best-selling author, and founder of Raising Humanity. She discovered through her own life process, deep healing, and by the way of her own children, just how important it is to take responsibility for ourselves and reclaim the joy, freedom, and aliveness we were all born with. Raising Humanity, a transformational development platform, helps people recreate their foundation of beliefs based on their own values so that they can walk their most authentic path and support future generations in living theirs. She believes that revolutionizing who we are as parents is the path to creating sustainable humanity. Ladies and gents, please welcome Ashley Avinashi. Hello, Ashley. What a joy to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's so great to be here with you.
I've had a very nice introduction to your work through our network, and I've already interviewed some of the amazing women that you know, such as Madalena or Alina, and all of you share this aliveness and happiness around finding your path and living from your heart fulfilled. And I feel like the first time I conversed with you, you had this very nice positivity around what you do and how important it is for the world and how you want to share the message with all of us. Parenting is at the base of us as society because we all, or at least some of us, go through this path of raising children. And my first question for you to start with, it's to define for all of our listeners, what is authentic parenting?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for these questions, and thank you for creating the space first off for us to talk about this, because you're absolutely right. Parenting is at the foundation of our society. And that doesn't mean that you have to be raising children outside of you. For most of us, what it means is we're raising ourselves. The truth is that most of us have grown up not knowing effectively who we truly are, because we understand that as young children, we do take on the beliefs, the attitudes, the thought forms of those around us. And that's simply because we're born into dependent systems. We are codependent as young children. So inevitably, because our survival is dependent on those around us, we just naturally learn to orient ourselves in the world through our parents. So this is really where I want to start, is the fact that this work or this path is not only applicable to those who have children outside of them, but those that are committed to understanding themselves more deeply.
Let's go a step back and talk about how do you introduce the topic of first parenting and authentic parenting to those who never question their parenting style or generally raising children, like they never really thought of this concept before,
Mm.
or either that they don't want to, or they didn't know about it, or they don't want kids, or they don't have kids yet, or whatever the situation is. How do you explain those concepts to people who have never been in any conscious practice or are not really aware of all these different options for them to discover?
Yeah, great question. So, yes, let's simplify and let's take it back to a really personal level first. So, the reparenting or the self parenting, where it only applies to you as an individual first and foremost. If we begin there, the questions that I begin to ask is, are you living your life with a buoyant, light energy? Are you living your life feeling that you need to do all of these things on your checklist to please people around you? Are you feeling that you're being true to your values? Are you feeling that what you go out and do each and every day is really aligned with what you're passionate about? And if you aren't, why is it? What is keeping you from doing the things that your heart, that your intuition, that your inclination, that your instinct actually wants you to do? And for most of us, if we ask ourselves that question and have never contemplated it before, the answer that will come up for us is because, I think I had to. I think I was supposed to. I think that my parents wanted this of me, and then I just got used to it because I wanted security. I thought that this was right. Now I have my circle of friends in my workplace, and yeah, I think it's okay. So we normalize mediocrity. That's what we've learned to do as a society, that what I've gotten used to is okay. And this is the reality of it, is that 95% of the things that we do in our lives, the beliefs that then transpire to thoughts, the thoughts that then transpire to actions, most of this is plugged into our subconscious. So our subconscious is the part of the brain that we're not aware of. It's running a background script at all times. And then there's the conscious part of our brain. So we talk about consciousness, yes, even within authentic parenting, because that's the part that you're aware of. It's like, hey, I've gotten to know that this is a part of my life as a result of XYZ. I do this because I intentionally want to go out and do this. But you can imagine if 95% of our lives are driven by this old narrative, this old story that belonged to our parents, maybe belonged to our caregivers, our society, teachers, siblings, friends, everybody that we're influenced by on our trajectory. When we stop and ask ourselves that question, it can be really painful. It can bring up shame. It can bring up guilt. It can bring up discomfort. And this is why most of us don't ask ourselves that question, because we've just learned to fit in from our childhood and onwards. So that's where I'd begin the contemplation, is what does it mean to be true to you? Because at the crux of authentic parenting, that's all it is are you living as the truthful version of yourself? And effectively, whether it's unconscious or conscious, if you're not being truthful to yourself, you're being dishonest. You're being dishonest with yourself and you're being dishonest with the world around you. And that's what we've come to know in our years of working with parents, is most parents haven't actually been loving themselves and as a result their children authentically. They haven't been living from a place of honesty. And that's a really hard reality to come by, because most of us are doing so much, not only for ourselves, but for our children and for our parents and for our siblings and for the world at large. I'm doing all this stuff for my employer. How many times have you heard that? I'm working overtime. I'm doing it for them. I'm doing it for them. I'm doing it for them. And this is what happens. That dissonance happens. That polarization or that gap happens. We call it emotional hunger at Raising Humanity. But that gap happens when we don't know who we actually are under these layers and layers and layers of patterns that we've adopted as a result of others' pain and sometimes joy too. So that's where I'd like to begin, is really in identifying is, where are you feeling unalive? Where are you feeling encumbered in your joy? Where are you feeling like you just don't have permission? I can't do this because I don't know what other people will think about me. So often we turn the trajectory outside because we don't want to trust ourselves. We don't want to declare our truth. We don't want to do what we value, because that's a very noble and sacred and uncertain path for most of us as humans.
Hmm. What you talk about right now is something that, with my background of being an East European, first of all, I started knowing about these concepts when I was in high school, towards finishing high school and so on, through different acquaintances and different events that I got to go to, and just hear some very interesting talks that just made my mind really wonder, oh wow, what's that concept? What is there, right? A lot of what you are describing right now to me sounds like a person that sounds like if a person wants to discover this, they would need to take a very deep path, meaning going to therapy or finding some sort of coach, or taking a going through a program and so on. But you also pointed out something very interesting, that we as society, we are not really thinking about it. And it's something that it kind of strikes me that we've evolved so much, yet we still don't value as much this sort of knowledge about oneself as we value knowledge about different sciences and whatever, like everything we value in formal education, right? And my question is, for people who just don't have access to this information for various reasons, when they find out about it, or listeners to this podcast, where do they start? Do you think they should go to therapy? Do you think they should make some exercises? Where do we start understanding ourselves?
That's a great question because I think, going back to trust and truth is we all have such individual paths. And that's the beauty of the journey is there's no one right way. And that's something we speak about a lot at Authentic in the authentic parenting space is that how you wish to parent yourself based on the lack or the void or the gaps that you felt from your own childhood, from your own upbringing. And again, not to blame the parent, but rather to say, hey, I wanted to be loved and seen and nurtured and held and supported in a certain way, and that wasn't there for me. When this situation happened or that situation happened, I realized that I had nobody to talk to. I realized that there's probably some, I mean, we don't use this word again so steadily in our societal context, but trauma. Trauma is a miscalculation of the events that have happened outside of us based on another's perspective versus our perspective. And when that bridge isn't built between the person who may have caused that action or done that harm in our lens and us having an open portal to communicating that with them, this is where this dissonance happens. And that's where we start to fire out, the blame and the shame and the guilt, or we internalize it and say, this is all my fault and this is my problem. So all that to say that depending on what we've experienced and how we've either internalized it or projected it out onto the world, we may be compelled to do very different things. For some of us, it's so deeply buried inside of us that we have no access to our emotions. And you can imagine how that goes, right? For a lot of us as women, we've learned how to act like men, especially in the Western world. We are a colonized, sort of outwardly governed system. We've never learned how to inwardly govern ourselves in the West because this knowledge was never here. We sort of cut off from this knowledge in Canada. It's a lot of the indigenous that we literally just threw off the land and said, hey, we are going to develop this sort of new agey concept on how we move forward together as a society, but we're not really connected. And that's what we've attempted to do in the West. But in the East, this wisdom has resided for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So the first step for me was actually going back to my lineage, going back to so many of the teachings that resided within my family system. And this is, I think, something that we as humans have a tendency not to look towards is what existed in my family that I can actually learn from. More often than not, if we're in pain, we cut off from our families. And you've probably seen this a lot in the conscious and the spiritual world. Yet, as Ram Dass says, we can really share how enlightened or awake or alive we are based on how we're actually doing with our core family unit. Because that's where most of our wounding is held. So that's where I'd say if you feel safe enough, start to explore. What actually happened within my family system way back when that I still hold on to? And most of us, when we're going through this contemplation, we call it the pause at Raising Humanity, the 3 Ps, the pause, the process, and the play. But in this first stage of pausing, we usually need some support. We usually need to have people around us who say that your tears are okay. It's okay for you not to know. because we're so used to knowing, especially as for me, it was being a corporate woman. I was so identified with knowing because in the corporate systems, that's how the trajectory goes. There's not a lot of room for unknown. There's not a lot of room for unfamiliar or I don't know if I can tell my boss if I don't get this. It's about the production and the assembly lines and going and pushing and having more and doing more to prove who we are. So as a result, taking a step back from life and being in that discomfort is very, very unsteady territory for most of us. But if we can first, whether it's our family or others around us, just surround ourselves with a few people who can really see us, who can just hold us in the tears or the anger, because anger is sacred as well. And it's just built up unprocessed emotion that sits in our body. That's all it is. So if we can first invite people to be around us who maybe have walked a little bit of this path, they've, they may just be a couple steps ahead. No shame, no guilt, no blame onto ourselves for not knowing earlier. It's just where our life was meant to go. And say, hey, do you mind sharing a little bit about what you've gone through? Do you mind holding me here? Because I really feel like I need somebody. I don't feel like I can go back to my family or my really good friends because I've gotten so used to being with them in a certain way that I don't have the courage to be different with them. I don't know how to be different with them. Would that be okay? Would it be okay for me to invite you in and just for me to receive for a little while? Because when we look at love, it's a cycle of giving and receiving. And this is what we so often forget when we're so used to giving and giving and giving. And all we're doing in that giving cycle, especially in these intellectual, frameworks that we've landed ourselves in Western medicine, Western psychology, Western education, we forget what it's like to receive. We forget that the feminine hand, the left side of our body, is here to receive. And that's an important part of the love circle. Otherwise, what we'll find is that well eventually dries up. So it's courageous and it's a compassionate act towards ourselves to say, hey, can you take care of me for a little while? I promise not to put everything on you, but I just want to be seen. So that would be the first place I would direct anyone to. Slow down, cut things out of your schedule, allow yourself to start feeling, because the feelings are ultimately your compass. And then eventually you move past the pendulum swinging on the feelings and you come into more and more of the equilibrium that we talked about. But the feelings are usually the greatest indication as to what's working and what's not working in our lives.
I love it. And I want to ask something that I feel it's a very nice continuum to what you just said. You said something very interesting that I'm sure a lot of listeners will also, let's say, identify themselves with. And that is having your own luggage and then going out there with all of that luggage unpacked and then having children and starting raising them without still unpacking your luggage.
Mm-hmm.
So, to what extent do you believe that we should all unpack that luggage? And how should we tackle this so that it doesn't affect children in the process of raising them?
Yeah, so this is another place in which authentic parenting, I think, has a bit of a delineation from traditional consciousness because the way our new age growth models have worked, self-inquiry, self-development, personal development, everyone has to do it. And we look at social media and there's all these memes everywhere saying, just do it, make that choice, make it happen. And what we're forgetting is we're such complex human beings. We've been layered and layered and layered with imprints, not only by what I've talked about, the parents and society and the siblings and the peers at school and the teachers. Not only that, but if you believe so, the lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes that you've lived beforehand. Maybe you don't believe that, but through the Indian lineage, what we do believe is that when you're born to this world, you're also born with an imprint. And then if you don't believe that, then, the reality is that when you're in your mother's womb, through that gestation period, there is 9 months of imprinting happening even then. So before you even come into the world, you have a plethora of imprinting. within your karmic faith or fate or destiny, however you see it. So first and foremost, I want to remind us that we need to really be compassionate on this journey. And something that our Eastern philosophies really speak to is the fact that we're not meant to clear it all. The children who are being born into your life, your partners, your peers, whoever you're crossing paths with, these are all teachers on the path as well. We're meant to continue to learn and evolve. And the day that we stop evolving as humans is the day that we actually collapse, is the day that we become unfunctional, is the day that we start developing this separation consciousness in our bodies. We will continue to evolve. So what we remind parents who come into our space, or even non-parents who are looking at having children in the future, is that we do the amount of work or unpacking of the luggage that we're called to. We don't force it. We don't try to manipulate it. We don't try to intellectualize it, which is what authentic parenting is really about, is get to the crux of it, but do it authentically. Do it truthfully. Don't go through the motions. Don't go and do your hour of yoga and then your 2 hours of meditation, but be sitting there with the intention of, I've got to fix myself. I've got to clear all this. I've got to be perfect for the world. Because all we're doing in that case is we're reinforcing the unworthiness that we're trying to move away from. I say rather instead, embrace the demons or the parts of ourselves that we see as demons. They're not demons. That dark is the source from which the light emerges. So it's so important for us to recognize that those parts of ourselves that we don't like, the shadows, however we might call them, they are also our partners in crime or in joy or in justice or in peace or in love. They are here to help us. Just as the relationships that we consider dark or nuanced, they're also here to help us. So do what you can do. Follow your intuition. Sit and contemplate in your heart. What is it that I'm called to in this moment? And if I'm called to explore through therapy, check it out. Go to a couple sessions. My younger sister's a clinical psychologist in the world of postpartum, actually. And what I recognize is that there's a lot of pushing. There's a lot of efforting through that process. I need to be here with my psychologist each and every week to make sure that I'm different for my family. And we say, no, let's stop the trajectory. Let's stop the treadmill of running and running and running after more to do, more courses to enroll ourselves in, and just sit with acceptance first and foremost. I love myself. I know I've done some pretty crappy things in my life. I've hurt people. I haven't seen the world with grace. I haven't been grateful for my experiences. And I'm okay. I'm okay in the discomfort because what I know is that something new is being birthed in me. This discomfort is telling me that there's shifts coming. This breakdown is telling me that there's a breakthrough in my future. So the gentleness and the compassion are such an important part of this journey. And that's where I bring us back to, because I could recommend the 40 modalities that I've tried. I can recommend all these things. I can recommend our programs wholeheartedly because I know they do incredible life-changing things. But first and foremost, pull back and be with yourself and tell yourself that you're okay, that you're worthy, that you're loved, that you're whole no matter what anybody says about you. It doesn't justify continuing to hurt people, but it just does justify you getting the support and starting to care for yourself. So I know I didn't give you an immediate quick fix answer in that, but I hope it helped to nurture some allowance for a different trajectory forward, not one that we often see in this Western world, but one that we're coming into, I know, because the pushing and the intellectualization of growth isn't working. And that's why we see so much spiritual or bypassing, of the consciousness.
I want to continue on this path by asking you to give us more insights into what exactly is it that your role or path is at raising humanity. Because you said that there's now no modality that you can right now share, or you want to share something that this is a recipe, try it out, and see
Mm-hmm.
how it goes. If not, you'll find another one in the basket. You'll just go and take another one, right? So you're talking about starting from scratch to know yourself by stepping outside of your normal, let's say, path of expectations, right? Like how things should be. Scratch that. Don't think about how things should be and just listen to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
To take a break. Madalena nicely talked about how she wakes up at 5 a.m. so she doesn't go um, to practice medicine at 7 or 8 a.m. with some sort of luggage that she might have, so she takes time in the morning to just clear her head and time for herself. And that was Madalena, the medical practitioner on cardiology, right? And now you talk about the fact that we all expect a recipe or
Mm-hmm.
5 ways to solve our life problems from childhood and that there's no such thing because all of our paths are individual and unique, and it comes from all of the different layers that our ancestors put forward. This is what I
Yeah.
understood. I hope i'm I'm grasping it the right way, or at least a way that makes sense also to what you're sharing, right?
Yeah.
um, I would like to state something that you say on Raising Humanity, the website, and then kind of take us through the process more, so we get all of us more understanding of how do you see this path forward, because we, for the listeners and for all of us to understand this sort of process, I think we do need some sort of structures, and you mentioned the 3 Ps and how you approach it. But you also state 95% of our behavior as adults comes from the beliefs developed through our earliest life experiences. If the beliefs don't serve our truest selves, we cannot connect with ourselves or our children authentically. What you said in the beginning, right? About authentic, being authentic and raising
Mm.
from an authentic place. At Raising Humanity, we call living from such limiting beliefs emotional hunger, like you've mentioned. Can you give us more insights into the process and what do parents go through or experience during your programs? And what are the 3 Ps that you mentioned? What is the process? How should people tackle this if they're curious about and want to step into authentic parenting?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that question. So again, whether you have children or not, the work is the same. I don't even like to call it work in our space. We don't call it work. We call it play because it's really about us enjoying this moment now. That's one of our virtues, one of our values that we not only bring into our parent programs, but we also bring into the new School of Intuition that we've created for children, because we recognize how often we wait until we have the degree. We wait until we have the job. We wait until we have the kids in the house to be happy, to feel fulfilled. And our invitation through through the parenting programs and through our schools for children is really to offer you a path of real freedom and joy and trust in yourself. That's at the crux of it, what we are moving towards. And I think that's applicable for all of us as humans, is are we here to struggle? Or are we here to now create in new ways moving forward? Again, not denying what's come before us, acknowledging that, transmuting that, processing that, and then recognizing the freedom that we now have around choice. As we can keep looking at our external conditions and say, well, I don't have a choice in that, and I don't have a choice in that, and I don't have a choice in that. But the truth is that future generations can only be free if we've found that freedom first within ourselves. So, where our program first starts is in the balancing act. So, the balancing act is really a representation of the treadmill that we're all running on as society. And I say all, maybe 90% of us. Just like I was in my corporate career and then in real estate, I could go through the motions. I'd learned how to act like a man, if I can say, the way that we just keep going and pushing and doing more and more and more. And my intuition was present. I mean, that was something that had been not buried, sorry, nurtured within me from childhood because my mom was already on the path. But it did become buried as I got more out into the world and I started moving quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. I forgot. I had I'd lost the remembrance of who I actually was and how I was meant to operate. So that's where we begin, is talking about the treadmill, talking about where you are tied to this treadmill of overdoing, of overgiving, of overbeing, which is effectively for the validation of your uncertain self within. You know, what am I having to do to prove my worth on the outside? Because we know that's been with you since childhood. If you've gone through these Western education systems, you know that you've learned to compare and compete and collect information to prove your worth. That's how the education systems are built in the West. So it's nothing new, and it can be quite a shock for people to start to come into this work. They're like, but I have to, but I have to, but I have to. I've been told to. I don't know how to do anything differently. So we start to dismantle that story. We start to say, well, can there be a choice in even small moments in your life, to say, at these 3 moments in my day, I'm going to sit with myself, and for 10 minutes, I'm only going to be with me. I don't pay any attention to what's going on outside of me. Even if children are in my space, I'm going to let them run around. I'm going to let them do whatever they need to do. I'm not going to try and control my outer circumstances and make it all peaceful and quiet and, feel perfect. I'm going to let that go for 10 minutes in that moment and sit with my cup of tea and really enjoy it and say, Ashley, you deserve this. Anda, you deserve this. You deserve to be with yourself in these moments. That's what we're reconnecting to. So as parents or non-parents start to explore those part of themselves, they slowly, very, very slowly, layer by layer by layer, start to see where they are attached to their outside circumstances and world, where they're looking to control. So control is the piece that we come into, recognizing within ourselves, because as non-parents, it's hard to realize how much we're controlling our lives. It's hard to believe that, the perfect workout at the perfect time, and then the perfect meal with the perfect friends, and then, the perfect work trajectory with the perfect colleagues, this is all really something that we are attempting to control. And the minute it's off balance, we flare up and we're in chaos again. This is the reality for most of us. I didn't expect to be in the unknown, and shoot, now I've landed in the unknown and I don't know how to navigate. On the other side of it, with children, you're in the unknown constantly. You don't know what they're going to bring up. You don't know when they're going to wake up. You don't know when they're going to want food. You don't know any of this. And this is our true nature. It's unpredictable. It's chaotic. And within that chaos, we find a common thread of peace. That's the reality that we're bringing parents into slowly. Now, the second part of that is the reconnection project. This is the full-fledged experience. So this is something that we've been doing for years, where you really have a chance to reconnect, not only with your childhood and the pains and the joys of your childhood, what all came through your ancestral lineage, what you've picked up from that and carried forward into adulthood, but also to reconnect with the truth of you. What would it mean if I actually spoke my heart out into the world? I reconnected to my joy. I reconnected to my aliveness. I reconnected to my freedom. So this is a 6-month path that's an in-depth study of self. And I say study in the most playful way. It's a light, joyous path. And at times it's going to feel really difficult. It's going to feel really uncomfortable. And this is why we do most of our work in community. Because we recognize that without community to constantly cheer you on and say, keep going, I've been there, I've done that, we recognize that our path can feel really fragmented. It's like going to the therapist's office one week, and then the therapist is booked for the next month, and then you're feeling really unsteady. Because you're like, wait a second, I thought I got that, and now I'm falling short, and I'm blaming myself, and I'm, just like going to the retreat. We go to a retreat, and then we come back home, and suddenly we're diving even deeper than we did before the retreat. That was meant to happen, but without the support, it's really hard to feel the momentum, of the continual process. So we do most of this in community, and we also do one-on-one process, because we realize that there's a lot of things within us that do need that deep dive attention that we are meant to sink into in more private spaces. So this balance between one-on-one process in online calls and group process is really what catapults our members into coming into so much shedding, because they're doing it on a regular basis. They're in 2 calls a month in deep process, And they're constantly in front of like our curriculum that I've written, all of our modules, all our processes, our mapping systems. They're in front of that as often as they wish to be. That's all at their fingertips. They no longer have to go to a therapeutic setting or a retreat to access that. So at every moment that they're open and willing, they can come into the forum and they can start talking. They can start speaking out loud about what's happening in their bodies, in their, in their ecosystems at home. So that's how the two paths look. The first one, the balancing act, is 4 weeks, and the second path is 6 months with an option of another 6 months add on for integration, because we feel that the integration process is something that's missed time and time again in the growth world. We just jump to the next course and the next course, and we never really allow it to land in our bodies and take shape in our real lives. And then the next part of it is one on one coaching with me. So this is where we really dive into our purpose, into our gifts. Because I know for all the years that I was in corporate and in real estate, I felt like I was in the right place at the right time. Those were the lessons that I needed to learn. But when we sometimes start tapping into what purpose actually means, that it's not necessarily our vocation, but it comes from rather being true to ourselves first, being that, and then choosing something that really fuels us from that place, we recognize that purpose is so different than how it's been sold to us in this world. Usually it's, I think I should be doing this based on my conditioning. I think it'll make me a lot of money. I think it'll have me feel validated in the world. I think it'll give me the security. I'll do that. And then when I start suffering in that, that's when I'll go in the other direction and start leaning into my intuition. So we're flipping that script for parents and children and saying, no, let's first nurture the intuition. And then from that place, your purpose develops, not from your intellect into your purpose later on. But now we recognize that for a lot of us who have been living sort of this inauthentic path for a long time, we do have to do it the other way around. So be it. Let's do it at 20, 30, 40, 50, because we have the tools. We
Hmm.
have the opportunities now. We have the community.
Hmm.
This kind of stuff is common speak in our world today. It's not something you have to hide out around.
And what about the School of Intuition for Children? What does that mean, and where do you think that can fit into a curriculum that is outside of a school such as yours? Do you think there is a way to tackle this in school already, in kindergartens, and bring awareness to the importance of intuition and conditioning to a certain extent?
Yeah, so I think that what we've created as a holistic learning center fits so naturally into our early years, because the whole premise of this is that the child is already quite a full vessel, and we're just here to nurture the gifts that are already within them, as opposed to the intellectual route, which is again that polarity of saying, well, this child knows nothing. They don't know how to self-govern. They don't understand themselves. And as a result, we have to tell them exactly who to be in the world. That's the way the intellectual systems are run, is that you are worthless, you are useless, you are not enough until I can impart my knowledge on you. And that to me is one of the biggest fallacies that we're sold as children. Just because I'm smaller than you, just because I'm 2 feet off the ground, just because I don't yet know how to talk to you about my emotions, it doesn't mean that I'm any less capable. It just means that I've been incarnated from such incredible wisdom and intelligence in my body that I'm now learning how to communicate with you. And you as a parent are probably going to be very conditioned by your control, by your need to be like other people. So our framework, and we're not really one of saying, as you already know about me, of saying that this has to be your trajectory, this has to be the modality that you use, because we realize that that just gets people into boxes that they can later no longer get themselves out of, or struggle to get themselves out of. So what we do is we put 3 live sessions out there every day for children to dive into. So ages 5 to 15, the children can come in and they can play with the mentors. And the mentors are people who have already been doing this type of work for a very, very long time. They've been in the inner journey. So they get what it's like to connect to their inner child. And as a result, they can connect to their outer child, the outer children, a lot more readily, because they're not scared of what it's like to be loud. They're not scared of what it's like to be free and curious and play. Yet, if you put a conditioned teacher in front of those children, they will likely try to keep that child quiet, conforming, orderly, and preparing for the tests that'll later prove themselves. Because that's a trajectory that traditional teaching has walked by no fault of their own. It's just the system. So with this particular playground, as we call it, it's really a chance for children to follow their intuition. Am I feeling sick today? Is there something going on in my gut health that's telling me that this is probably not the place I should be? And as children are given that space, parents are also reflected back as to how controlling and controlled their lives have also been. So effectively, the parents get a chance to learn from their children as they see their children blossom in their true gifts. There's workshops in there. And then on the other side, there's a lot of support for parents and there's a lot of support for teachers because we realize, in our Holy Trinity that it's a collective, it's a collaborative effort. Children aren't meant to go and walk this path alone without much support. The parents have to continue to do their unpacking of the luggage, as do teachers, to really meet each other more authentically and sincerely with time. So this playground, it represents a lot of freedom. And that's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people who haven't been given permission to be free in their bodies and their expression and say, I want this in this moment and I don't want that. I feel resonant with this teacher and I don't feel resonant with this teacher. We've never been given that level of freedom. But now it's time to recreate our foundational systems from this energy of freedom. Is it going to be uncomfortable? Yes. It's going to be very uncomfortable for those who have believed that they are attached to these very, if I can say, fear-based constructs.
Mm. What you describe now, it's a school of thought that many will just dismiss because it's not how my child will be successful.
Mm-hmm.
I will You will not get to
Successful, yeah, in the
exactly.
outer world as it stands right now. But we know that success in the future, the prosperity of the future, is not based on incredible amounts of financial wealth. It's not based on image. It's not based on prestige. It's not based on pride. It's not based on running this treadmill day in and day out. It's based on care. It's based on collaboration. It's based on creativity. So we're learning to value those things as the framework of future prosperity. But this is very new for humanity because we've been so caged in by our minds for so long. So sorry, I wanted to clarify that for anybody who is having those thoughts of what freedom has felt like, and they're starting to move in that direction already.
And I'm very happy you did, because why I really wanted to talk to you is also to open our minds to some concepts that we just never were put in front of, and that maybe they're so new to our environments, even though they're not new, but they are in, like, it's such a complex setup now, and it doesn't need to be. So
Mm.
if any parent or person that just wants to take care of themselves first, and then also raise children to the extent of feeling that they really authentic with themselves, I really hope they feel inspired just to think about the concepts you are now putting in front of us, because it's hard and it's very uncomfortable, and we all know that if something is uncomfortable, I'm going to step a bit in the back, and I'm going to just pretend like I was never here. I'm just going to leave in the back. I'm not even going to try. I'm like, what is happening here? Like, what are you even discussing about? No, that's not what I know. Nobody told me about this. None of my friends do this. Nobody understands this concept. I'm just going to pretend like I wasn't here. Bye. And then you
Yeah.
have these uncomfortable situations where people maybe want to listen to you, but they're really not there.
Mhm.
They're like,
Mhm.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So the aim here is also to just be open to the idea that there's a lot of things we don't know, and maybe there
Mhm.
are people out there that are just meant to share this knowledge with us today, and hopefully give some space to consider it, right? And I really
Mhm.
wanted to ask you, please, to tell us a bit about your journey, because you've had a very successful corporate and real estate career, as we've discussed in our call firstly. And then you said that you realized that that was not really what you were meant to do, and you felt that this is not really something that is actually true to you. And my
Mm,
question is, how did you discover this? How do you switch from a successful corporate career, for example, to building your own program of authentic parenting and a school of intuition for children? How do you tap into something so different?
mm. That's a great question. That's a question that I get a lot because I do understand how uncomfortable that is when everything is looking great and your trajectory is fine and you're financially settled and you go on the, lavish vacations. I mean, all of this stuff wasn't even a second thought for us. We were just able to do it. And I was working 12 and 15 and sometimes even 18 hours a day, where I would be up breastfeeding my children with my phone in front of me throughout the night. That's how attached I was to this validation from the outside world. But I didn't see it as validation. I just saw it as I'm made for this, I'm good at it, I help people in doing what I do. So why not continue? And when you've spent, as you know, so many years in the education system building up to this, vying for that university scholarship, going through all these years of exams, it's really hard for us to justify stepping away from that and looking at life differently because that whole trajectory is based on fear and control as we've already spoken about, right? There's no room for contemplation. There's no room for slowing down and saying, what would it mean if I actually rested every day in these moments and just allowed this new energy to take space in my body as I relaxed? Like that is it's looked at as a very passive way of being. For me, it didn't come in so gracefully. It came in like a ton of bricks. Some of us have to be hit by that 2x4, of the universe in order to wake up. And that's how it came into my life because I was very, very stubborn. I wasn't willing to slow down and take this time. So the way it showed up for me was I started to feel very physically exhausted in my corporate career. I had a lot of symptoms, the anemia was not allowing me to wake up with vitality. I was showing up to the office in the morning and I was really de-energized. And then, you get into the coffee and the eating out to compensate and being with friends to compensate. And I didn't really even have time for that in my corporate career. So much of it was just running sort of 9 to 9 or 9 to 10, bringing the work home and doing the same thing all over. But what I realized is my skin started to react and I started to develop ovarian cysts. And, I found myself just on my knees again and again and again. I recognized that I didn't want to live life this way anymore. And where it really, really hit me was one day in the corporate world when everyone who would otherwise sit around the boardroom table, all the directors and the VPs, I was sort of working alongside the president of our company at that time, and there was only one woman at that boardroom table. And I'll never forget the day that I think 7 out of 11 of those VPs was let go. Same day, they were escorted out of the office because this is how downsizing happens in the corporate world. It's cut off, you're gone, give us the keys, end of the story. And I looked at that and I looked at all these incredible humans who had gotten to know, incredible humans who I knew had so much heart and beauty within them, but weren't in full expression of that in the corporate world. And I said, is this something that I can bear? That I've put all of my blood, sweat, and tears into this one path and have it just all stripped away from me. I find no personal sovereignty in this path. And when I found the one woman there, Janice, and I had asked her about her children and what her relationship was with them, because I knew that in the future, I didn't actually know I wanted children, but it was something that I was contemplating for my future. Do I want a partner? Do I want children? Because in the Indian culture, this is like a pinnacle experience. You have the families and you settle down and then you have multiple children. So I was contemplating it. And there was a lot of pressure from my mom at that time to do that as well. But at the same time, as I saw this woman, I thought, that hardening that happens in the woman, I didn't know if I wanted to live like that because my mom had already been planting seeds of freedom, of aliveness, of growth, of inspiration. This is the way she had always worked. But I was very close to that. I was still on this very linear trajectory of the treadmill, all these years. So that was probably the first thing. And then the second thing in real estate was my kids arrived in real estate. And that was probably the most painful couple of years I've ever had in their first years of existence on this planet. And it wasn't until my second son arrived, and he was born with club feet, and I was in the hospital every week. And I didn't know if he would be able to walk, and he was put through 3 years of treatment. But I remember looking at him at 6 months, and my other son was 2 years at the time. And I was going through my daily motions of throwing on the clothes and feeding them the oatmeal all so I could get out and work again. I looked at them and they were fully lifeless. I had a moment that I will never forget where I was literally just throwing the food at them, rushing out the door, trying to get to my work, the all important work that's outside of the home. And I realized that there was no way that I was going to continue as was familiar to me. I couldn't do this any longer. My parents took that path because they were immigrants. They didn't understand what life was like here. They were just trying to bring food to the table. That's how different their reality was. But I did have a choice, and I recognized that choice in that moment. And after that, my younger sister, again, working in clinical psychology with postpartum patients, she said to me, she goes, Ash, you're actually looking for validation from these children. You keep saying that you have to do and you have to do and you have to do, but this isn't your reality. And that's what really had me on my knees for years and years to come. And I said, just help me, universe. Help me see what I wasn't able to see. And of course, there was guilt and shame and beating myself up for not seeing the signposts on the path. And then as I started surrounding myself with more and more people who could see the love within me that was buried deep, but it was still there, I started to unravel the constructs and the conditioning one by one by one. The layers started falling away because I realized that I wasn't going to be the best version of me as long as I was attached to what I had learned was normal. That wasn't the version of love that I wanted to live in. And I'm not making that bad or wrong. I'm just saying that there's so much more that we don't give ourselves credit for as humans when we are attached to these very linear intellectual systems. And with that, I mean, it's been years and years of incredible opening to possibilities. And now I can safely say that I live the life that I want to live without shame and without guilt. But it's been a lot of waves, yes, and so much grace. Like the amount of grace that's come into my life. It's like I no longer need to swing like I used to. I've found a much healthier balance. And as a result, my children are safe to be themselves. They can express, they can dance, they can say, no, that's not me, Mama, that's you. They can say these things now at 5 and 6 years old because they've been given the space to find themselves in this shared ecosystem.
Mm.
So that's the gift that I think we pass on, whether we have children or not. We plant those seeds for future generations like my mom did. And she had to wait 20 years until I could circle back in that true knowing. But she was very patient with
Mm.
me. And that's the beauty of this is we don't tell one another what their paths should be. We just simply open the gates for that to be a possibility and have them meet us if and when they're ready. And
Mm.
if they're not ready, that's okay too. But at least we've learned not to take it personally anymore. We've done our 100% of our 50% in relationship, as I learned in therapy school. And at that point, we say, I love you and I honor whatever you choose.
Mm. And how beautiful you said that now you're living the life you're supposed to live. And I wonder if we all do a mental exercise now, everybody listening, how many of us can really say that? That whatever life is for you now is really exactly the life that you feel you're supposed to live. I find that very deep and also very revealing to many of the listeners that even if you're old or young, working in a corporate or not, or the whatever whichever way you found this podcast, I really wonder if this is something that we think about enough if we are living the life that we're supposed to. I would love to wrap up with any advice that you have for the listeners regarding authentic parenting and finding their authentic self in order to raise children in a way that it's not coming from a place of fear or from a place of conditioning that maybe they had, and they're unaware or aware of. What would you advise anybody listening to this podcast that has or plans to have children, or maybe just wants to discover their authentic self?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in our humanity. Perhaps you can call me an idealist in some ways, but I'm also very much a realist. I really have seen this work unfold, this work or this play, however you identify it. I've seen it unfold in many, many parents that we work with, many teachers, many children who are impacted by the work that adults choose to take a responsibility for. So, with that, I encourage you, if you are having that sensation in your body, if you're getting tingling through your body, if you're feeling that calling in your heart, to step out and begin exploring. There are so many people out in the world to support you and to see you. And the closer you come to your intuition and what your heart has to say, the more you'll just naturally be guided to the path that you are meant to be on. And this is, again, it's not a linear path. You'll have to be open to uncertainty. You'll have to be open to unknown. You'll have to be open to not being able to control every step of the way. But what you will find is that the peace that comes from not knowing in this journey and surrendering and being open to, however you want to say it, the magic or the serendipity or the synchronicities of life is beyond, like, it almost brings me to tears to think that children will have a chance to live in this newfound world, as parents come into it. And how many years I didn't even believe this to be possible within me. But it's tender and it's real. And what I'm reminded in our world today more than ever is that we have a choice. We do have a choice, and this only begins with very, very small choices. Because this moment is only an accumulation of all the choices you've made up until now. So remind yourself, it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be the whole shebang, the fireworks. You don't have to change your life today. But the smallest contemplations of how differently life can look can shift the way that you feel about yourself, and as a result, how you see the world. And that's ultimately what governs how you treat other people in the world. And this will ultimately be the world that future generations land in. So remember, whatever you are doing for yourself, as much as you are valuing the light within you that exists there, that's one thing that I can tell you. I don't know every one of you, but that's one thing that I can wholeheartedly tell you as a fact, that you were born out of that light. You didn't come from any mistruths. And the more that you can spend time and energy nurturing that within you, the more you are giving way to those who come after you. And that's something that I feel we have a responsibility of doing as adults on this planet, children or no children. We are here not only for ourselves, but we are here for future generations. You don't have to build platforms like we did. You just have to take responsibility for yourself in moving towards that trajectory if you so choose. And if you choose not to, you will find that you feel unsupported. You will find that perhaps you feel this inkling of isolation, of constant isolation in your life. But as you widen the lens, as we call it in our School of Intuition, as you widen your lens, you'll see that there's so much support here. Nature is supporting you. Humans who have walked this path before you are supporting you. There is so much supporting you. So lean into it if you have this calling in your heart to say, what else is out there for me?
How beautiful. What a beautiful conversation, and how different it is than what I thought it would be. Because I came
Mm,
into thinking that this is a ABC of I don't know how to raise a kid from age of 2 to 5. I don't know. I had some obviously expectations. I don't know why. Like we always step into different situations, and if there's something that I was told and something that I'm really trying to share, maybe that he's helping me really doing all my projects and also being true to myself, is starting from zero, not from minus or from plus. Like start
Mm,
having expectations and just go in and see what happens, and you'll be able to react to it the way you are meant to react to it.
mm,
And I'm so happy and grateful we had this conversation, and some of the questions that I didn't really prepare are just were just there, and I hope for the listeners it really made sense, because I think it's just such a revealing conversation. Thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you so much for your time and all for your wisdom and thoughtfulness, and for wanting to share this with all of us.
Thank you for the space. And thank you for being open. Because without you being open to new ways that this conversation could have moved, we wouldn't have seen this, this magical connection that can happen between two humans who haven't yet met each other, but have just connected online. So this is the possibility that we exist in. And the more open we remain, the more armored we remain, the less we attach to how things need to be, the more of this can come into our lives, and we can really experience what we're here for as a humanity.
Hmm, beautifully said. Thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for more episodes with inspiring female role models. I hope you felt inspired to take charge of your next career move. Remember to review this podcast and share your comments. Thank you.